Have you ever thought about networking? What can you do to make better wealth decisions by improving the way you network with other people to see if you can find ways to fit in more to advance your career, but also just to have more purpose in life? We'll talk about that this week. This is Make Better Wealth Decisions, a podcast about financial blind spots, decision making, and how the reality of higher rates, global tensions, and tariff instability impact your investments. I'm your host, John DeGuy, a portfolio manager with Design Securities in Toronto. My guest this week is David Tsubouchi. He is an author, but he is also a former progressive conservative cabinet minister who has served in 5 different portfolios here in Ontario. He serves on several boards. He's a regulator, and he's a man who does a great deal of things, including making connections. David, how are you today?
Hey, John, thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
I'm looking forward to speaking to you about your new book, The Ripple Effect, which is wonderful. And where did you come up with the name, The Ripple Effect? What does that exactly refer to?
Well, it's the third name. My preference was, first of all, my friend Mark Keeley is the co-editor of the book. And I was playing with one. I said, well, we're kind of the odd couple because he used to be senior advisor, John Turner, and I was a conservative cabinet minister. So we're kind of an odd couple, but we're both middle of the roaders. So we're like, middle left, middle right and everything, particularly on financial stuff, I'm middle right. And so that was number one choice. The publisher didn't like it. And then my number two choice, which he really didn't like, because, one of the things you learn is as you're going up in the world, you have no choice when you're young. You work with some people that are probably not the best people in the world. You get to my age, then you get to pick and choose a little bit more. And so my number two choice was the no asshole rule, which of course the publisher really didn't like because the book's distributed down the States, and they wouldn't like that. And so the ripple effect was one that we were just sort of brainstorming one day, and Mark and I came up with it. That's all. But it's how you get a little pebble makes big ripples, and that's kind of the networking thing. So we thought it worked.
Well, I understand your problem with your second book. My most recent book, which is there over my shoulder, is called Bullshift. And, you have to put the F in. You can make references to Brandolini's Law and whatnot, but, you've got to be able to put the book on the shelf in bookstores. And so, yeah, you do what you can to, but you want to get people to pay attention by the same token. The idea of the ripple effect is one that resonated with me. I wanted to give you a chance to tell the story in your own words. And a lot of the book is about storytelling. The subtitle is Networking for Success, but it's been said that a lot of people would say that it might be subtitled How Givers Win Through Relationships and Integrity. And I want to explore that, how people develop relationships and how they can show their personal integrity as they go about doing whatever it is they do in life. Can you perhaps tell me a little bit more about that thesis of networking by showing integrity and having relationships?
Well, it's interesting, John, because we've got 20 writers in total, including Mark, myself, and they're all our friends, mainly my friends. And they all started with nothing and made something of their lives. And I get asked to lecture once a year at York University on diversity to a class of about 250 kids. And afterwards, you always have a dozen or so kids who have other questions for you to come down and talk to you. They never ask me about my theme. They ask me basically, how do they get to where I am today? There's a commonality here because when you get folks that start in subsidized housing in Scarborough, and he's a Métis, my friend Murray Simser, became a serial entrepreneur and success in Silicon Valley and runs technology companies now. And so they're good examples. And we look back at the folks that wrote the book, and by chance, 4 are East Asian, 1 South Asian, 2 Black, 1 Indigenous, and almost half are women, and all groups that have difficulty networking, right? But to your point, though, there's a commonality, a theme going through this all. And it's really about the quality, not the quantity of your networking. And when I say that, it's like, those of us who've taken any type of governance training and things like that, it's all about the culture of organizations. And that's how you can create success, through culture, really. And your circle of network is much the same. It's about culture. And to your point, what does that mean? It means integrity. It also means people, it's so easy to be empathetic when someone's down. It's tough for your friends to, give you sympathy. But when you're successful, you want your circle of friends to be happy for your success. and not thinking, oh, how can I get something out of this? Or why can't that be me? And
Right.
certain amount of jealousies. And so you surround yourself with the right kind of people. You will help each other to succeed. But you have that integrity of that group. And again, it comes down to quality, not quantity.
So it's funny. I should mention in passing, Mark Keeley, your co-author, or maybe I should say co-editor, because you guys really just collect the stories from different people who tell their stories in their words. Mark has been on the podcast previously talking about his political life and the lessons that we learned for making better wealth decisions. One of the things that I've read that I think resonates with me is that it's a lot easier to get ahead if you just get that promotion and get an extra $10,000 a year raise. That's a lot easier than trying to get an extra 10% on a $100,000 portfolio or even an extra 1% on $1 million portfolio. If you can just earn a little bit more money, that can be the best wealth decision you can make. And if you have to network in order to do that, that would be a very purposeful and honorable way of getting ahead in life. And, there are a lot of people who want to be helpful and want to help you to do all those things that you say without jealousy, without any kind of looking at you sideways, wondering about, well, why is it him and why can't it be me? A lot of what is in the book is a series of stories, people telling their own life story about how they networked. And sometimes it's more deliberate and sometimes it's almost haphazard and happenstance. I'm wondering if you could perhaps talk about improving social skills. And I know that a lot of the target is young people. One of the things that I find is that young people these days, I've also done some lectures at various colleges and universities in the past little while. And one of the things that I find is that they're not as good in speaking with people one-on-one because they do so many things virtually. And I think it's unfortunate because as a skill set, that's something that would be serve them very, very well. But it seems as though the world these days doesn't set them up for that. What are your thoughts about social skills for, let's say, people in their 20s?
You hit the nail on the head. I mean, you and I sort of learned our social skills by going out there and meeting people and sitting down and talking to them. And you're right, with the use of phones and technology, that sort of separates people from the actual personal connection. That was, of course, multiplied by having COVID come in, where all of us started doing this communications remotely. So that's a whole generation that's gone through without kind of human impact. Like, during COVID, of course, the boards I was on, we'd be meeting remotely. And during that time, of course, we had new board members come in. And you don't have that same connection to your fellow board members when you've only talked to them virtually, because you get to know them during the coffee break, during the lunchtime, during the time off, and you get to know them personally. And so it's a skill that really is necessary because that's what creates relationships, is that ability to do that, but also understanding certain things as well. Because I remember once years ago when I was working for a big law firm, and I was meeting a client at one of the private clubs in town. And I had with me a senior associate who was, sort of working with me. And we go there, and this elderly gentleman, he's got a jacket on, he's sitting at a table. The first thing that the kid does is takes off his jacket from the back of his chair. And I said, does our client have a jacket on? He says, yes. They say, well, I think that's the proper protocol for the time. But a lot of people don't even understand simple, like courtesies, etiquette, all these things. Like, I grew up as a kid, after the Second World War, people hated Japanese Canadians, and the government took everything we owned from us. So we had nothing. We started basically after the war. My parents were let out of the prisons with $50 each. We came to this country with $20 in our pocket and started, got to rebuild this again. So when you don't have much, your world's very small. It's like this. And so we didn't have going to movies or certainly art galleries or stuff like that. Books were a luxury in my house because we couldn't afford them. That's why I learned libraries were important to me. But I learned things like etiquette from books. I had to go to my way to learn these things because when you haven't got that experience of going out to restaurants or things like that, you don't really necessarily know how you have to behave in other type of company. But you're aspiring to do this. Like, my dad was a dry cleaner and my mom was a mended clothes. Eventually he made enough money to buy the dry cleaning store he worked at. But during that period of time, I knew that I did not want to be a dry cleaning presser. And I wanted to aspire to do other things. I'm the first one in my family to go to university. And at the time, there were not a lot of visible minorities around in Canada in the 50s and 60s. No role models. No one has done it before that you can see has done it again. So you have to learn these things on your own, but you have to be. The other theme that comes out of this, which is what I'm talking about, is people who are successful through network or otherwise in business have that persistence, have the ability to go on no matter what happens. And you know this as well as I do. I mean, no one's success is like this. We all have this happen to us, regardless of how successful you eventually end up being. And quite honestly, I've learned more from my failures than my successes. Actually, I've learned more from my spectacular failures than my successes. And we've all had those, right?
It's funny listening to you speak because I'm Caucasian and I'm a little bit younger than you, but otherwise our stories are very similar. My parents are immigrants. I grew up on a farm in small town Ontario. My parents had nothing. I was the first person in my family to go to university. I was learning as I was going along and no one could really teach me either. And so those are the things that you talk about. And I've heard you talk about this before. You talk about getting help, being persistent. And one of the things that I think is really useful that you've mentioned is you've mentioned being a good talker, and sure, we can talk about that in a moment, but you mentioned being a good listener and being able to listen. So I wonder if you've got an anecdote that you can share with regard to the importance of listening as you do your networking.
I always say that meeting people you don't know is way up there in the fear scale, up with death and giving a speech. And they're probably number 3 because it's very hard. I mean, I always think it's like being in grade 7 and going to a school dance and all the guys are lined up against one wall and all the girls are against the other wall. And the guys are afraid to go over and ask a girl to dance. And the girls are afraid no one's going to ask them to dance. But somehow you got to get the courage to do that. And I always say, look, no matter what the event you're at, there's always someone standing by themselves. Go up and introduce yourself. But here's the important part, as you're saying, John. If you approach somebody and you're like a fishing expedition and you shove out your business card, that's not networking, in my opinion. And you're not going to create anything. You don't know if there's a reason for you to have a connection with that person or not. But as you say, if you listen and you talk, you may find some commonalities to have a discussion on various things. And then if you really connect, then it gives you an opportunity. Yeah. So yeah, the listening part is very important. I mean, look at, again, lawyers are not necessarily the best networks in the world, believe me, because, they'll buy a $10,000 table at some event and they'll sit at the table and just talk shop and they won't go up and meet anyone new. High school, right? So I'm going to high school and I'm the only visible minority. We don't have much. And on top of that, I'm accelerated through school. So I'm the youngest kid. So I'm 12 years old going in grade 9. And I'm barely 5 foot tall and maybe 95 pounds. And that doesn't really endear you to high school society in terms of popularity. Luckily for me, between grade 9 and grade 10, I got my growth spurt. I'm not the biggest guy in the world, but I wish I had my brother's genes. My brother's like 6'1", 215, and he was a better hockey player than me, so he was successful. But funny enough, my grandson is 6'8", and he's pitching for the Ontario Blue Jays up here, and he got offered 2 scholarships to pitch down in the States, turned them both down, and took a partial and he graduated this year as an aerospace engineer. So he's a rocket scientist, and he got those genetics from my wife, not me, because I'm just a lawyer. I don't think like that. But when I got my growth spurt, I was a decent athlete in high school. So, I was the running back for this football team. I wrestled. I was a gymnast. I played hockey. Well, once that happens, you endear yourself to the jock crowd, right? I was a band geek too. I played first clarinet and I was president of the band. So I'm with the band kids. And of course I got good marks. So I was with the brains, the band kids, and the jocks. And all of a sudden the penny dropped on me. I'm the only kid in the high school that's invited to all this stuff. So that's kind of where you've got to sort of go beyond your area of comfort, your area of expertise, and try to connect with other areas. What gives you value as you get older? You don't have to be the expert on these things in the business. You have to be smart enough to hire the experts to work for you. So you have to be able to recognize these sort of things. So I always call myself a generalist, but it's the accumulation of all the different things you've done over the years that give you value, that allow you to see the world from 60 stories up, which gives you value again for any board you're on. But also, it becomes easier as we get older. Because when your midstream career, sometimes you may not speak up because you think, well, what if I cheese off somebody and it sort of affects my trip to the top? When you get to my age, you don't really care. So if I don't understand something, I'll say, you got to explain this to me so I understand this sort of thing. Or if I have an objection to something, I'll say that. But, you have to do it in a respectful way, of course. So it helps you get wise as you get older. I only wish I was this smart when I was like 30 years old, but I'm not. I wasn't.
You've got me thinking again about a couple of semi-autobiographical things, because I'm sort of in awe at how your story and my story intersect and rhyme. I was not the most popular guy in high school. I was also gangly. I was not really a great athlete. I could maybe run cross country. I was tall and thin, but I was the geek. I chess club, reached for the top team, student council, band, stage band, all those things.
Wait. I was reached for the top two when Alex Trebek was the host.
See? So basically, we're carving copies of each other, David. What's funny is that I got involved, like Mark, actually in liberal politics. This is something that I don't usually even mention on the podcast or with my clients, but I got involved in liberal politics. Since I'm speaking with you, I think it might be worth mentioning. And I was a policy chair for the province of Ontario and ran for the presidency for the Youth Wing in 1986. Lost, and had a conversation with Senator Lorna Marsden. And Lorna said, John,
my friend Lorna, she's the one that sucked me to go on the board of York University.
See, we all know each other.
Yeah.
So I'm speaking to Lorna,
yeah,
and she says, John, maybe we can set up a dinner and you can meet someone. You tell me who you want to meet and I'll make it happen. And I said, well, Lorna, I don't know anyone. And I went to University of Guelph. I was just new to Toronto. I don't know anyone. Whoever you can find, I'll be there. So she says, how about Jim Coutts? And I'm going, are you kidding me? The former principal secretary to Prime Minister Trudeau Sr. And so we set up the dinner, and I'm speaking side by side with Mr. Coutts. And I did the networking question that I asked him, the question that everyone asked you, how do I get to be where you are? And specifically, if you were me, what advice would you give me? And it broke my heart when he told me, John, because I said, I'm sort of a generalist. I told him exactly what you just said. And he said, well, you got to specialize. Now, I don't know what I want to specialize, because I'm like you. I want to hire someone who will know and connect the people and do all those things. But I want to be the overseer and the strategist. But I didn't want to go deep and narrow. I wanted to be a mile wide and an inch deep. And it's funny, again, just listening to you speak, because it seems as though you and I, think very much the same way and have a lot of life history that we have in common.
John, these young people ask me, how do they make connections beyond their reach? And I'll say the one good thing you should do is become a volunteer in politics. Yeah. And I said, I don't care if you're a liberal. I don't care if you're a conservative. The NDP doesn't really help you in business, but one of those two. But you got to go to a party you believe in. But here's your opportunity, because when you're a volunteer there's so many important people that are volunteers as well. They see you as an equal volunteer, not as someone who's aspiring to do these things. And later on in life, these connections are important. Look, when I was a young kid, just wet behind the ears, a new lawyer, the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center asked me to go on their board. And then they wanted to get a private members bill through for a property tax exemption like other cultural centers had gotten. And so they asked me. Now, I don't know bugger all of this at this age, but I know sort of the process. I couldn't do it. Dennis Turnbull was the MPP, but he was also the cabinet minister who can't do a private members bill. So they introduced me to Don Cousins, who was going to shepherd the bill through. And through that process, I met Don. Mel Last was the mayor of North York, so I had to get his say-so, and I got to meet Mel. I got to meet all kinds of members of the legislature with it. And I'm just a kid out of law school. I don't know these people, but all of a sudden I do. And then after we got the bill through, believe it or not, then Don asked me to go on as executive. And I started my practice in Markham. I first worked at Tridel, and then I started private practice in Markham.
I used to work for LVO too.
Oh, for God's sakes, what a small world. I walked into the front door and the first day, and then I think Fred Zorzi was there, and Fred said to me, well, here's 12 different condominium projects. You're in charge of all of them. And that's why I learned how to do condominium law. But after that, I decided to open practice in Markham. I had no clients. My only employee was my aunt, who worked for me for free. But when I connected with Don politically, and I became the chair of his fundraising stuff, I got to meet almost every influential person in Markham on a personal level, which of course helped the law practice. and of course helped, later on when I actually ran for office as well. So politics, I mean, I knew nobody. I mean, I'm just a nobody who came out of school who, had no influence, no connections, nothing. But all of a sudden through politics, I did.
It's funny because having been involved in youth politics in my undergraduate days, I think it's a great way to meet women as well. You guys get to meet women and women get to meet men. So there's that as well. But you're with people that A, give a damn, B, don't mind rolling up their sleeves, and C, really understand at an intuitive level how the world works. It's the sort of thing that a lot of people, what I find is that political people understand current events with a level of detail and granularity that is rare, that they understand. And so if you're looking to make a connection, to make better wealth decisions, to advance your career, or to just be better at whatever it is that you do, hanging out with people who understand how the world works is a great way to get that leg up, because, just the storytelling that you're talking about, being able to make connections is so vital, and it's so underappreciated, which is why I really want to thank you for writing The Ripple Effect, because it's a book that I don't think I really quite realized how much the world needed this book until, I went through it. I went, wow, that's exactly what we need. We need to teach young people stories about how, if they just stop and listen and think about, hey, I care about that too, and rolling up their sleeves and just doing things. And as a result of doing things, they find commonality. And through that commonality, you might start doing business, not because you're just handing out fistfuls of business cards, but because you actually like this person and you can see yourself, oh, there's no sense in trying to do business with the person you don't like. Find people that you like and see where that takes you, socially and politically and commercially.
John, you said something really important. You said doing things that you care about.
Yeah.
And so that's so important, regardless of whether or not you're joining the Optimist Club or the Rotary Club. You got to believe in what they're doing. You can't go there because I'm just going to leverage this for my own business. And people know whether or not you're full of it or not, and whether or not you are a true volunteer to these things. And as silly as it sounds, it's the golden rule, really. You look back in your career, people who have helped you with the goodness of their heart, I'll go way out of my way to help them out.
Right.
If someone's quid pro quo person, you're actually negotiating for the least I can do for you. And so it's not transactional, it's relationship-wise. You build those strong relationships over the years, and believe me, it really comes back, 20-fold to you. Again, you've got to care, you've got to be sincere, you have to have integrity. So, I've been involved with things over the years that may not become successful, but I stuck it out because I committed to do these things. And when you do that, people come back to you with other opportunities. If you bail all the time, people know that. They're not going to trust you, right?
Yeah. And it's funny because I just realized there's one other element of my life story that I think might be different from yours. It just dawned on me now. I grew up on a farm in southwestern Ontario between Kingsville and Leamington by Point Pelee. In fact, I was just at the point just yesterday. And we had a stall at the market in Sarnia. So it's a 2-hour drive to go to market to sell your tomatoes and peaches and melons and corn and whatever. A lot of hard work. My dad was a phenomenally hard worker, and I learned I'd gone soft. I would never have his work ethic to begin with, but he had a fantastic work ethic, which is obviously important in terms of trying to get ahead. But we would go to the market in Sarnia. We would get to Sarnia at 5 a.m. We would start unloading the truck, have breakfast at 5:30. And as the dawn was breaking at 5 minutes to 6, people from Sarnia would be walking in and saying, so what's a quart of tomatoes going to cost? They're there already before 6 o'clock, before the market is even open, trying to buy something. And what I learned, and here's the kicker, I learned to talk to complete strangers. I wasn't a wallflower. So great day we're having. Yeah, so how'd you like the tomatoes last? Good. Okay, well, and of course, then people start schmoozing. Oh, yeah, we picked them for you this morning before we came. Come on, that's obviously not true. Like, we're at Sarnia at 6 a.m. But we would, you'd say different things to get people talking. And that's the thing. If you can get people talking and build a relationship, my father was fantastic at this. And I don't think I really realized that I was learning from him until much later in life after I stopped doing this. But the other farmers would say, Neil, my dad's name is Neil, you get so many people come to your stall when I can't get anyone else. But he was always looking for ways to talk the people up and to build a relationship and to build a rapport so that people would A, remember him, but B, like him, and then C, ultimately do business with him. It's amazing how that skill set is very transferable.
Well, my dad was the same. My dad would talk to anybody. later on in life, when he was sort of retired and played a lot of golf, and a number of people used to come up to me all the time and just say, "Oh, I was just golfing with your dad." Interestingly enough, in the book, there are so many of the writers who would identify themselves as being introverted. When I was a kid, and we used to go through and have to do an oral composition at school, in grade 7, you pull a topic out of a hat, and I got baseball. I might talk about baseball, but except when I was that age, I couldn't talk to more than one person at a time without looking at my shoes and mumbling. So I had zero self-confidence in anything. A lot of these people that write these chapters in the book are the same as me. And all of a sudden, you got to figure out somehow. When I got, high school, I became a decent athlete. That kind of gives you a little more self-confidence, what you're doing. And then I remember one year, grade 10, my friend said, "Oh, I signed it up for us for variety night. We're going to go on the stage and play our guitars and sing." Well, you go on the stage and you sing, it's a little easier to talk to people. So that kind of helped me an awful lot. And one last thing, too, this is going to sound so funny, but I grew up, my parents would say, "Be proud of who you are." But at the same time, they would say, "Keep your heads down, try to fit in." And the conscious decision of the Second World War, not more than one Japanese Canadian family moved into any neighborhood because you can't find us, not a little Tokyo, you can't put us all in prison again. It was a conscious decision by the community. So we all grew up in isolation. It was difficult to do that, to be honest. And then, of course, 50s and 60s, 70s, anyone played an East Asian in the movies or TV was either an evil criminal like Fu Manchu or a war criminal, or was a caricature like Mickey Rooney at Breakfast at Tiffany's with a lisp and buck teeth. I hate that movie, by the way. And so there are two conflicting things. Be proud of who you are, yet fit in, integrate, and no matter what, you couldn't, because I was in a visible minority in my school. But then Star Trek comes along, and George Takei is an action hero. And when I first met George, I was at his 75th birthday party, too. He's a great guy. And I said, "George, you changed my life." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I told him exactly what I just told you." And I said, "Then you come along, and you're an action hero." And all of a sudden, I started thinking, maybe it's cool to look like me. So George Takei changed my self-perception of who I was, and it was a role model for me. So it's funny how these things intersect your life and have different impacts, like a TV show. I mean, I'm a Star Trek fan to today, so there you go. What can I say?
All right, so we're drawing to a close, David, and this has been fascinating. And believe me, I would love to keep on chatting because it sort of feels like Goals Home Week. The podcast is called Make Better Wealth Decisions. If it was up to you, with all the things that you've done, the author of The Ripple Effect, former politician and cabinet minister, board member, regulator, lawyer, you've done so many things. What advice would you give to the listeners to help them make better wealth decisions?
It's about integrity for yourself and your circle of friends. And if everyone has integrity and they're happy for their collective successes, we all rise. So then that's really it. It's about having the right culture and the right people around you. Not more complicated than that. It's kind of like be a good person.
That's a lovely way to end. David, I want to thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
I had a lot of fun talking to you too. You're a great guy. Hey, take care.
This podcast is not to be construed as offering specific investment advice. Please consult a qualified advisor before acting. My books, Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry and Bullshift, are available online. If you'd like to meet to discuss how the topics in this podcast affect you directly, please visit my website.